Welcome to the Reason for Truth podcast and video. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo. In studio with me today, special guest and special friend, Jonathan Paul of JonathanPaulConsulting.com. Just the way it sounds, it's spelled JonathanPaulConsulting.com. John, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, you're welcome. We talk about today, John and I, I used to work for him, and we used to do assessment and job placement and that type of thing, do a bunch of job fairs and recruiting, special projects and assessment of gifts and that type of thing. And John's going to share with us today, because he works with companies from certainly a Christian foundation and a Christian perspective, on passion and giftedness, right? Passion and motivation.
Yeah.
So, and passion and purpose. That's what I think trying to get out of my mouth. So passion and purpose today is really what we want to talk about. And, the Bible's very clear, John, that you look at the Bible, you look at Ecclesiastes, I think of Solomon, and Solomon says very clearly, it's all toil. The best thing you can do is enjoy, your time under the sun, but enjoy the work of your hands.
Yeah, amen.
And Solomon says that over and over, and it's interesting because it's clear that he's communicating that we are to work with our hands and we're to enjoy that work. And that's a central point, and that doesn't mean necessarily the way we think of work today, but, God has given us something to do, and I think, in today's world, I think one of the biggest tragedies is the belittling of a mom staying home with her child, because she can be so much more than that. Even though most of the people who say that their mom stayed home with them, that's besides the point. But where do you want to start? How do we meld passion and purpose?
Yeah, so maybe we could start with Ecclesiastes, just on the dignity of work, and then talk about how the Christian might view work. So I love that verse in Ecclesiastes where Solomon says, give yourself to the work of your hands, love the wife of your youth, and fear God. And that's always been a profound thing for me, particularly in recent days, because, he had these great projects. He had more and accumulated more and experienced more than men will ever experience on the earth for the most part. And he wasn't happy. And, he said it's all frustration, right? It's all hebel. It's all frustration. His conclusion at the end of his days is fear God, enjoy the work of your hands, give yourself to it, and enjoy the wife of your youth. And what a simple and beautiful recipe for fulfillment, right? Fear God, enjoy the work of your hands, and the wife of your youth. And so we'll talk about the work of our hands. Work was created for our dignity. And one of the things that we can talk about just maybe quickly is that we are born for a sense of purpose. And when we're working, and we're working both the gifts that we have and, in a sense, the environment we should be working in, and we're engaged in part of our passion, we have a great sense of fulfillment, even if the work is difficult, right? Even if this work is difficult, we have a great sense of fulfillment. The reason that purposefulness for all of us is important is that it leads to well-being. And work was designed to mobilize our gifts, to mobilize the best of who we are, to subdue the earth. And our reward for that was fulfillment, right? We're contributing to the forward progress of mankind. And, right, the Bible starts in a garden and it ends in a city, right? That's from John Stott, right? That means progress. There's progress in work. We're contributing to subduing the earth, right?
That's a good point. I never thought of that. Never heard that. So I think it's great. You're right. We started in the garden and we ended up in the city. Folks may not know that the United States of America was an agrarian country. 80% of the people lived in on farms, 20% in cities, and now it's 80% in the cities and 20% on farms. That's why the whole electoral college is important, or people on farms would have no vote, and it just wouldn't be versus just the majority vote. But you're right, John, and I think we need to take that into account in terms of being, especially if we're in a city, metropolitan area, that we must be a light for Christ, all the more important. But I do want to read that Ecclesiastes 5:18-20, and I'm going to use the New Century Version, which I've never read before, but it's an interesting version. It's definitely more of a paraphrase, but it says, I have seen what is best for people here on earth. They should eat and drink and enjoy their work because the life God has given them on earth is short. Very true. God gives some people the ability to enjoy the wealth and property he gives them, as well as the ability to accept their state in life and enjoy their work. They do not worry about how short life is, because God keeps them busy with what they love to do.
Amen.
And there's a lot of the great rendition of that. It's not the literal translation you'd get in ESV, so I don't want people to think that's exactly literally what the Bible saying, more of a paraphrase similar to an NIV, but I think it is a great descriptor there. I think there's a lot of things we can break down, John, here. So Solomon is writing Ecclesiastes, first of all, at the very tail end of his life. So he's looking in the rear view, right? That gives a little bit of perspective. He's not at the beginning, he's not in the middle, he's towards the end, and he's able to look back on all his experiences. That he says, what should they do? They should eat and drink, enjoy their work. He's not talking about getting liquored up or, obesity. He's talking about, but enjoy your food, enjoy the things of life, and enjoy, the work of your hands, because the life God has given them, where you is on earth is short. It is so true, John, is it not? I mean, I was just a kid, and now I'm in my 50s. Where did that go? And in the blink of an eye, I think about that all the time.
Still kind of a kid, though.
Listen, you know me. I said the day I grow up is the day I grow old, and I'm not growing old that fast yet. And I'm not good. I don't need all the cosmetic stuff done. It's all in the head with me. Gosh, I appreciate that. That's a compliment. I got kids, man. I got to keep up with it somehow. Jeez. But the thing is interesting. In verse 19, it says, God gives some people the ability to enjoy the wealth and property he gives them, as well as the ability to accept their state in life and enjoy their work. I mean,
wow.
What do you think? What's interesting is the ability to accept their state in life. That kind of says some people have more than others, right? Yeah. I mean, it says a lot of things. Some are wealthy, some are politicians, some are in the projects, some are. I think people in the projects a lot of times deserve better and should help themselves, because I don't think they're enjoying the work of their hands. They're living off the government. Right. What do you think about that? I mean, what do you think? Enjoying the wealth and property God gives them? That doesn't say how much. Doesn't say, listen, you could have a little house, and then you get a big house. It's just enjoying whatever house God's given you.
Yeah, and I think that, I think a couple things. I think one is that we represent the body of Christ, right? Christians do, the church does. And there's different parts and different gifts. And when we accept our part that we play, then there's contentment with that, because there's fulfillment, right? In a sense, there's a lane that we've been given, and when we understand, first part is understanding what is that lane, what is our purpose, what part do we play in the body, there's fulfillment and contentment around that. And I think some of those gifts are simply going to be more visible than other gifts, and on this earth, that is. It doesn't mean that they're more important. Some on this earth may be rewarded more from a financial perspective, like the brothers and sisters that know how to make money, where that is a primacy. That's, from Deuteronomy, and that's a gift from the Lord. Well, it means that there's simply going to be some purposefulness that plays out in people's lives that lead to not greater fruition, but greater financial reward. But I think what we want to focus on is understanding what role people play in the body. How do you get that information? And how that, in its sense, how knowing their own purposefulness, by understanding their own passion and their motivation, which are two different things, lead them to contentment.
I think it's great. And you're right, their passion and their purpose. And, I think when I hear that, my first thought is Nancy Pelosi, on Obamacare passing, which I thing was a debacle. I pay $2,000 a month for health insurance. Horrible. Other people pay 50. That's not the right way to go. And I'm not that wealthy there, right? We're all wealthy, but we don't make that much money. But anyways, having said that, when I think about her saying, well, just go out and do your passion, learn how to play the guitar, go sing. That's not necessarily in line with what God's given them. It's just what they want to do. Remember Pete Brophy says, yeah, John, everyone has to go out and do their laundry after a while, right? Remember that? He used to say that.
Yeah.
And I think that we used to talk about giftedness back at the Jonathan Ladd Company back in the day, and how someone's going to act out their giftedness and their God's passions He's given them, whether they do it for vocation or not. And
right.
I think this kind of says, to me, some people. Let me read it again. Some people, God gives some people the ability to enjoy the wealth and property He gives them, as well as the ability to accept their state in life and enjoy their work. And that could mean, the state in life could be, does my daughter want to be a full-time ballet person, or can she just enjoy ballet and go and live more of a normal life? I kind of look at those things, and there's things that we do at Reason for Truth. We're bivocational purposely, so we cut out some of the pressures of depending on organizations and companies for all of those funds. Some people agree with that, some people don't. But at the end of the day, that's the way we do it. But it allows us to enjoy the work of our hands. And we depend on the generosity of others for sure, but we also don't put $2,000 a month on health care for a large family on that. So the point is that God gives some people the ability to accept their state, which is interesting. I'd like to see the original language on that. But I think there's a lot of truth to that. It's interesting because God gives them as well the ability to accept their state. Now, people can act on that ability. They don't have to act on that ability. Some people are not going to be content with what. Don't you think so?
Yeah, no, that's well done. Really, just discerning the word ability. He gives us the ability. So that ability piece, just to break that down just for 1 second for the listener, is that, one of the study from the integration of psychology to understand motivation and passion is an important truth. It just validates what Solomon said. It doesn't take away. It just gives us a little bit more color about things. And some of those things are is that we all want to express our created identity, right? So one of the ways that we express that is through work. And the interesting thing, of course, about how God created each of us is each of us have different patterns of functioning, right? So there's some common things that are common to man, like we all want to have healthy relationships. We want to mature as adults. We want to mature as Christians in our walk with Christ. But one of the things that is really quite different is everybody's motivation is completely different. One of the benefits of psychology is that it has codified how somebody is motivated, like what actually creates fulfillment for them. And that's broken down into themes. So if your life were a story, there's specific themes that always come up. And let's just focus on that for a minute. You talked about, God's ability to allow us to find contentment in our work. We find contentment when we're tied into what creates fulfillment for us. So we make a mistake often as Christians even to mistake pleasure from fulfillment. So fulfillment is that serotonin producing peace giving, achieving, and how we engage with the world and the earth, right? So our particular way that we subdue the earth. Like part of the way that you subdue the earth is by articulating truth, right? It's part of how you subdue the earth. You help people understand, and then you are articulating that in a world that desperately needs truth, right?
It's true.
Right?
Right?
Yeah. And it creates fulfillment for you, right?
Absolutely, it does. I mean, it defines what I'm going to leave behind and what I do for others here. Yeah. And really fulfilling the God's call on my life. That's the way I see it, is this is what He called me to do.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that there's everything that people do is ministry within their work. I believe that's the majority of people. But perhaps for some reason he called me to do this, and I've accepted that mission. As Solomon says, you know, he gives them the ability to enjoy the wealth and profit, and he gives them as well as the ability to accept their state. Guess that's my
so
state.
State. So like let's talk about that just for a minute, because we can get really technical, but without doing that, just a couple things. One is that what I was trying to get at with how the world is put together and how we're put together are two different things. So God created us very individually, right? But he didn't create us necessarily to work alone. He created us to work in groups.
Oh, absolutely.
So when we think of work, when we think of the work that all of us do, there's three spheres of work. There's government, there are social environments like teaching and ministry, and then there's business environments, private and public companies, right? Those are the three spheres of work in the world, okay? And in those three spheres of work, we have jobs that we create within those spheres of work. Well, we may have the same, like, for example, you might have an elementary school teacher for first graders. That job description may look the same across the whole United States, across the world. But the way that people both express their gifts and fulfill the requirements of that job are quite different.
Right.
So one of the hints to begin to understand what creates fulfillment for you, what creates what you love to do, your love to do space as opposed to your have to do space, is begin to recall the times when you felt a sense of achievement in your work. Like, when were you in flight? A specific achievement would be when I won the race, or when I taught a lesson and people got it in my first grade class.
Right.
Or when someone gave me feedback that said, hey, I remembered the truth that you shared with me. So when we understand our achievements are very particular to us. And that's the first step. If you just took 3 achievements from your life, things that you thought you did well and you enjoyed doing, and you just began to understand that story a little bit, what you would find from that story is that the themes, the things that create fulfillment for you, are the same in each of the stories, regardless of age. The environment that you're operating in is the same regardless of age. You've recreated an environment in which you could express your identity. So what all that simply means is that as God's creatures, we're going to move to the expression of our identity, who we are in the workplace. We're going to try to find our love to do space. And when that is rewarded, we have a sense of fulfillment. When it's thwarted, we have a sense of failure or resignation. So I feel like part of the listeners right now may be thinking that they're relegated to jobs that don't allow them to express who they really are. Right?
Yeah. My brother, next door's brother, he just took number 2 positions, pretty important in a smaller company that he came from, but he'd been there, 17, 18, 19 years. And he said, he says, I really think here I can really contribute, which is his way of making a big impact. He's number 2 guy, but he felt that was important to him as making that move. He could have easily a lot of people would have just skated on through and taken the check and said, hey man, I've been here, I'll just finish out. He's got a few years before he can, if he wants to, but he'll probably work for many more years because it's fulfilling, right? He's got that role.
Right. So we will always move towards that which is fulfilling. And if we don't find it, like if there's some reason we don't find it, I do believe that God desires us to find that place that where identity is expressed, our gifts are expressed on behalf of service to others, and in return we get fulfillment for that. I believe that's the good equation of God's work, is that He created us as a specific part in the body to do specific good works that benefit other people and that create fulfillment for us.
You said something key there that plays into a class I had taught with pastor here, David Ingrazia. He went to Harvard, actually, then he went to Dallas Theological. He was my pastor. I taught underneath him. He mentored me for about 5 years, and we talked about that. An added value company that helps others. If it doesn't help others, it's really not added value. Now, listen, added value could be making Band-Aids, People need
Yeah.
Band-Aids. Could be, listen, toothpaste. It could be screens for, cell phones, which could be used for good or bad. But what's not, added value, well, drug dealing illegally.
But gifts are probably still used there. They're just probably used in the wrong environment for the wrong means and ends.
Right, right,
Yeah.
and added value as a job, I guess. If you're selling a liquor store, probably not really. In generally speaking, not that you say you can't add value in your job. Maybe you can preach to alcoholics, I don't know, or people that are coming in that are maybe not saved or saved. Encourage them, but in general, in what is the work of our hands? I think that speaks to them.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's interesting the ability to accept their state in life. I'm going to be chewing on that for a couple of days and enjoy their work, because I think you see a lot of people today want to, and I think this is, in my opinion, it's a sickness in American business community, is the Peter principle of they just promote people. In our country, we are so good at promoting people right out of their giftedness. I mean, you and I used to do so much recruiting in sales jobs, and I remember some of the big companies we used to deal with. I remember, I don't know if I should name the company, but big company, pharma company, and I remember the national VP was there, and I remember him saying, they either get promoted in 3 years, or we coach them out of the company.
Yeah.
It's like saying, so you could have the person who was built to be a salesperson, and if they're not continually changing roles, and I think is interesting. It's not a biblical position. To me, it's in a logical position. If you had somebody who was a great salesperson, why wouldn't you let them continue to be a great salesperson or a great manager? And then you end up being a great salesperson, goes into a sales manager's job, and then they can't wait to get out of it to go do something else because they did their time. What do you think?
So I think part of that is that you have God who created specific roles for each of us. Those roles are indicated by our motivation, the particular things that express themselves in our identity that are beneficial to other people. And he also gave us something called passion, which is, it actually comes from our own story. And it means that what we, all of us have an injustice in our own story that we're trying to correct. And that's identifiable. But when you look at passion and purpose that God allowed, he developed it even in our own story and uses it. It meets a system of the world that rewards both power and rewards people financially. So we mistake the idea of rewards for the idea of fulfillment. Those are two different things. So we say people are motivated to make money. That's not true. There's very few people that are actually motivated for money at an end. We all like money because it's a means by which we feel secure, a false means by which we feel secure as Christians. But that's what organizations serve, right? So particularly if you're looking at public companies, they're going to serve the interest of profit rather than the interest of people.
Well put.
Right. They just simply are. They're geared that way, right? So if you're rewarded for quarterly returns, your focus is going to be on the numbers. It's not going to be on the people. The people are going to be a means to reach the numbers.
Yeah.
So I would say that in our lifetime, organizations have made strides to understand that there's a best fit in an organization for people, the role and responsibility piece. Like when they're in flight, when they feel fulfilled and they're doing their best work, and that best work is somehow finds its way into their job description, then that's a sustainable position for that person. I think the disconnect between corporate or organizational systems in the world and how we're motivated is they don't reward our individual fulfillment. And they assume that what creates fulfillment for us is power and money.
And what happens, John, that I've seen in the marketplace from all the years that we work together and since, is that companies put people into place to do jobs of leadership for the complete wrong reason. In other words, they need to make the company more profitable. So they give a guy or girl a big golden parachute, give them $10 million to go away while people are losing their jobs and can't feed their families.
Right. Yeah.
for doing a good job, even so. And their job is to come in and cut, remember you heard that for a while, that was like the thing maybe 15, 20 years, 25 years ago is, man, this person actually increased, brought the company by 20%. Well, they didn't really save anything. They typically just fired a bunch of people and made other people do more work. And that somehow that was some kind of gifted thing from God that, they were some great person they were just, in my opinion, knew how to cut costs and were somewhat able to deal with it ethically and morally in their own mind, in my opinion, to act immorally and act coldly towards other people. No one they don't have to worry about it. All these people have golden parachutes. I mean, you saw that at 9/11 when companies just said, and actually, no, I was thinking the crash of 2009. I remember they were going through all these executives on Wall Street, and one guy had just been hired like the day before. And he had a golden parachute, and they had to pay him millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to go to work for one day. But that was a contract. Yeah. Just unbelievable. That was the deal.
Talking about passion and purpose, so I would agree with part of that. There's the history of CEO and executive salaries came from the mid-90s. So before mid-1995, executive salaries were generally more in line, like an average executive salary was around $450,000 a year. It was more in line with what the president of the United States made if you were president of a big company. And when those salaries began to be exaggerated was when sports figures began to get paid more. There's a correlation between the heightened reward for what we see as athletic gifts with executives' gifts or executives.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that came about with the David Falk era, who was a lawyer for Michael Jordan, who was one of the first really in Bethesda here in Washington, D.C. And he was one of the first ones that began to elevate salaries of sports figures.
I think it's absolutely ludicrous. When we were kids, I remember you could always get even a bad seat at a game. Kids can't afford to go to the game. If your family doesn't have a lot of money, you have to be wealthy to take your kids to the ball game. Seriously. Yeah. My buddy was telling me just to go to a standard, and this is not good seats, these are just standard, not good seats, is about a family of 3 or 4 or 5, somewhere in there, your minimum of $300-$400 to go.
Yeah.
Just to get in and to get a seat, and that doesn't include having a nice dinner or anything. It may be a hot dog, if that. And I look at this. Some people are going to say, "Well, you're a socialist." No, I'm not a socialist. I think that I don't want the government to run us. Now I'm going off on another subject, but I don't want I'll end. We'll cover that another time. But I don't want the government to run us. My point is, on a moral and ethical perspective, is if we don't regulate ourselves, morally according to the Christian ethic, the government eventually does. And that's what you're seeing now with the millennials saying we want socialism. That I want to take that on at another time, but it does go back to all these things, in my opinion, become distractions for people living out their God-given called ability to accept their state, because they look at someone else and it's a wrong state. It's the wrong thing.
Oh, that's good. That's well done, right? So it's not just a distraction. It's a good word for it. It is a distraction because it hints that to be content in your own state, what creates fulfillment is wealth and power and visibility. And that's just not true. And what's sustainable for each of us, particularly as Christians, is we may find, for example, that we don't like the public eye. And I would probably be included in that as much as I'm asked sometimes to be visible, I'd rather be invisible and rather build other people up. And that satisfies the way that God put me together. So I think we would find that our contentedness, as Solomon said, is the best place to be. Right? It's a place of peace. It's a place of fulfillment. It's a place where we are giving thanks to God for what we do. And just one quick story about that. Our spiritual gifts are also tied into our motivation. It's another means by which we can deliver the gifts that we have. So I'm an encourager, and I realize that the Lord has given me an incredible opportunity to build up leaders. I mean, I love nothing more than to take truths, business consulting, psychology, backed with a foundation of theology, enduring truth, in other words, and help them create healthy organizations and to lead well. Like nothing gives me greater fulfillment to see my wife, to see my sons, to see leaders we work with operating in their gifts in a place of contentment and peace, and a place that their organizations are bearing fruit and employees are happy. They are engaged in their giftedness and their roles and responsibility. And in light of what's happening in the world right now, where people are taken away from work and some are relieved, some are missing their sense of purposefulness, I would say I'm the one missing his sense of purposefulness. When I look back at what the Lord has allowed me to do, I say, I'm like Solomon. I know no greater fulfillment than working with small private companies and helping leaders actually lead. You and I had the opportunity to work with almost 750 Fortune 1000 companies. We worked with almost every Fortune 500 company.
Over the years, sure.
Yeah, over a 12-year period, which is really an incredible opportunity, right? It was very visible. There's some sense even that we had of power and leverage. We were AT&T's number one company that they turned to in times of expansion and growth. And yet at the same time, I look at that era of my life and I look at an era now where I'm in my contentedness, and it's a huge difference. Like I don't need to be visible to be content.
Oh,
right?
gosh, I agree with you.
Yeah. Away in a small corner of the world, I'm quite content.
I've heard it said before, life's backwards. We should be born old and then go back into the womb in the end.
I think that's what being born again does. Right?
Oh, gosh, is it so? I say I set you up, John, for that. I didn't even know it, but I did.
Amen.
Oh,
right.
Gosh. Well, I tell you what, I want to wrap this up, and I want to cue us up for our next podcast, which will come up right after this one. So make sure you guys tune in for the next one, which is verse 20. It says, they do not worry about how short life is because God keeps them busy with what they love to do.
Amen.
Two things in there. I want to talk about next time the concept of retirement, which I think is really lopsided in our country. And I know I'm railing on all these things, but this is the way I see life. I'm getting to that point. But also, they do not worry about how short life is. And I want to talk about that because, and I'm not going to say anything more, but I just think life's real short. And that we're short-sighted in how we live our lives, use our wealth, and how we use our giftedness. And I want to talk about that next. But I want to thank you for being in studio with us today, John, on Reason for Truth podcast and video. And make sure y'all, if you're out there and you're a business person, you make sure you reach out to John. He is an incredible asset to your country. I could tell you his impact on my life. I wouldn't be here really doing what I'm doing if I had not met John, and God used that greatly. And you can reach John at by going there. There's you can reach out to him. There's a form there you can fill out, and it'll get to him at JonathanPaulConsulting.com. JonathanPaulConsulting.com. Just the way it sounds, just the way it's spelled. You can even Google it. John, thank you for being in studio with us, brother, and being together. And look forward to having you on a more regular basis. John and I were talking about that. This is fun.
Yeah, amen.
Appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you give us, if you're listening on iTunes, 5 stars. If you're in YouTube, thumbs up. The whole that stuff. This will really help us spread this gospel news. We don't really we don't make money on advertising at all, and we don't even sell any products. So it's the generosity of our supporters. If you'd like to do that, you can do that at reasonfortruth.org, reasonfortruth.bible. Either goes to the same place, and there's a / donate button there. You can do that. But outside of that, we'd ask you just like this, as well as share with your friends and then subscribe. Subscribing doesn't profit us, but it profits us really only in the eternity for reaching other people, which we have a heart for God and people, the greatest commandment and the second greatest commandment. And I want to thank you for tuning in for our program today. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo, with special guest Jonathan Paul. This is your Reason for Truth for today.